Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into an emotional and action-packed drama called My Brother, the Mafia Godfather. This story follows Kane, a ruthless mafia boss who has spent 17 long years searching for his missing younger brother, Ian. Just when he finally discovers Ian's whereabouts, he learns a heartbreaking truth. Ian has been suffering relentless bullying at Mont Horton High School and has been falsely accused of a crime he never committed. The constant abuse pushes Ian to a desperate decision that changes both of their lives forever. Filled with shocking betrayals, powerful revenge, emotional family moments, and unforgettable twists, this drama keeps raising the stakes with every episode. So grab your favorite snack, sit back, and make sure to watch until the very end, because every chapter reveals a new surprise you won't want to miss. Now, let's begin the story. For 17 long years, Kane lived with one regret that no amount of power or money could erase. Although he ruled one of the most feared criminal organizations in the country, every victory felt meaningless because he had failed to protect the only family he had left, his younger brother, Ian. As children, the two brothers had been separated during a tragic incident that destroyed their family and changed their lives forever. Kane never forgot the promise he made to his mother before they were torn apart. He had sworn that no matter how long it took, he would find Ian and bring him home. While the world knew Kane as a ruthless mafia godfather whose enemies feared even speaking his name, the people closest to him knew there was only one thing that could break his heart: the thought of his missing little brother. Every year he hired new investigators, searched through orphanage records, checked hospital databases, and followed thousands of false leads. But every search ended the same way, with disappointment. His advisors often begged him to stop wasting time and resources, believing Ian was either impossible to find or no longer alive. Kane refused to listen. Deep inside, he believed his brother was still out there somewhere, waiting to be found. One ordinary morning inside his heavily guarded headquarters, Kane was holding a meeting with his most trusted men when another investigator entered the room with his head lowered. The man looked nervous because he had delivered countless failed reports over the years. Before he could even speak, Kane looked at him with tired eyes and said, "Please, don't tell me you have nothing again." The investigator quickly shook his head. "Boss, please have mercy. We searched everywhere we could." Kane sighed deeply. "You say that every single time." The room fell silent. Then, after taking a deep breath, the investigator looked up with excitement shining in his eyes. "Boss, we found him." For a moment, nobody moved. Kane slowly stood from his chair, unable to believe what he had just heard. "What did you say?" The investigator smiled. "We found your brother. He's alive." The room instantly erupted with emotion. Kane grabbed the report before anyone else could touch it. According to the investigation, Ian had been located at Mont Horton High School in Montana. Recent photographs showed a young man whose face looked almost identical to Kane's. Although 17 years had passed, there was no doubt. It was Ian. Kane stared at the picture in complete silence. His hands trembled ever so slightly as memories of his childhood flooded back into his mind. Every painful year of searching suddenly felt worthwhile. Without wasting another second, he closed the file and looked at everyone in the room. "Tell everyone we're leaving for Montana immediately." His voice remained calm, but everyone could hear the emotion behind it. "I'm bringing my brother home myself." Within seconds, the headquarters exploded into activity. Bodyguards prepared the convoy, private pilots readied Kane's jet, and intelligence teams gathered every piece of information they had on Ian's life. As the private jet crossed the sky toward Montana, Kane carefully read every page of Ian's file. The report revealed that after being separated from his family, Ian had eventually been adopted by the Carter family, a wealthy household living in Copper Crown. At first, they treated him kindly, but everything changed after they had a biological son of their own. Ian slowly became an outsider inside the very family that had once promised to protect him. The report also revealed something even more heartbreaking. After suffering a severe childhood trauma, Ian had lost almost all memories of his past and spent 3 years receiving medical treatment. Because of those lost years, he was now 22 years old but still attending high school as a senior. Kane quietly closed the report, struggling to imagine everything his younger brother had gone through while he had searched endlessly for him. He looked out the airplane window and whispered to himself, "Just hold on a little longer, Ian. Your brother is coming." At that very same moment, Ian was completely unaware that his life was about to change forever. Inside Mont Horton High School, another miserable day had already begun. Ian quietly walked through the hallway carrying a worn backpack filled with old books. He kept his head down, hoping to avoid attracting attention, but it was already too late. As he reached his locker, one of the school's most feared bullies deliberately slammed into him, causing Ian's forehead to hit the metal locker. Blood immediately began running down his face. Instead of helping him, the bully pointed at the blood and shouted loudly, "Look what you did, idiot! You got blood all over my locker." Students nearby burst into laughter. Ian quickly apologized. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." But the bully only laughed harder. "Sorry isn't enough. Clean it up." While Ian wiped the blood from the locker with his sleeve, another student grabbed his backpack and dumped everything onto the floor. His notebooks scattered across the hallway, and several students kicked them away like garbage. One of the bullies picked up Ian's small handmade toy, a treasured keepsake he had carried for years without remembering why it meant so much to him. Smirking, the bully held it high in the air. "Seriously? Aren't you a little old to be carrying toys?" Ian's expression immediately changed. For the first time that day, fear turned into desperation. "Please, that's mine. Give it back." The bully examined the toy for a moment before smiling cruelly. "If you want it back, meet us on the rooftop after school tomorrow." He tossed the toy to another bully, and the group walked away laughing while Ian silently picked up his scattered books. Around him, dozens of students watched everything happen, yet not a single person stepped forward to help. Far above the clouds, Kane's plane continued racing toward Montana. He had no idea that while he was counting the minutes until he could finally embrace his younger brother, Ian was once again suffering alone. But fate was about to bring the two brothers together, and the people responsible for Ian's years of pain had no idea that the most dangerous man they would ever meet was already on his way to Mont Horton High School. While Kane's private jet sped across the country, his intelligence team continued gathering every detail about Ian's life. Kane refused to waste a single minute. He wanted to know everything his younger brother had experienced during the 17 years they had been apart. One of his most trusted men handed him a thick report and began explaining the situation. "Boss, Ian has been living with the Carter family in Copper Crown. At first, they treated him well, but after they had a biological son, everything changed. They slowly pushed Ian aside. He spends weekdays in the school dormitory and only returns to the Carter house on weekends." Kane listened without interrupting, but every new detail made his expression grow colder. He wasn't angry that Ian had been adopted by another family. In fact, he planned to thank them for taking his brother in. What truly disturbed him was the loneliness Ian had endured for years. Looking out the airplane window, Kane quietly said, "We'll visit the Carters later. Right now, I need to see my brother." Back at Mont Horton High School, Ian spent the rest of the day trying to avoid trouble. After cleaning the blood from the locker and collecting his scattered books, he quietly returned to class. His classmates continued whispering and laughing whenever he walked past, but Ian had become so used to the bullying that he barely reacted anymore. He simply focused on making it through another school day. Unfortunately, his problems were only beginning. As classes ended, Ian was walking through a quiet hallway when someone suddenly called his name. He turned around and was surprised to see Alyssa, the most popular girl in school and the girlfriend of Morton, the leader of the bullies. Ian immediately looked confused. The two of them had barely spoken before. Alyssa smiled sweetly and walked toward him. "Ian, I've liked you for a long time," she said softly. Ian was completely shocked. You're Morton's girlfriend. We can't do this." Alyssa stepped even closer, pretending to comfort him. "Relax. No one has to know." Ian quickly stepped backward, feeling uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, but this isn't right." Before he could leave, Alyssa suddenly grabbed his arm. Everything happened in an instant. The classroom door burst open. Morton, Richard, and Alex rushed into the hallway as if they had been waiting for the perfect moment. Before Ian could explain anything, Alyssa screamed loudly. "Help! He forced himself on me." Her terrified expression looked completely convincing. Morton immediately pointed at Ian with fake anger. "You disgusting freak. You actually touched my girlfriend." Ian's face turned pale. "No, I didn't. I swear." But nobody listened. Several students rushed into the hallway after hearing Alyssa scream. Without asking what had happened, they immediately believed her story. Ian desperately tried to explain himself, but every word disappeared beneath the crowd's angry voices. Morton smiled to himself. The trap had worked perfectly. Within minutes, rumors spread throughout the entire school that Ian had tried to assault Alyssa. Students who had never even spoken to Ian now stared at him with disgust. Some whispered insults while others openly called him a criminal. Ian stood in complete shock, unable to understand why no one believed him. It wasn't the first time he had been falsely blamed for something, but this accusation was far worse than anything he had experienced before. Far away, Kane's convoy had already landed in Montana and was racing toward the school. Inside the lead SUV, another intelligence officer suddenly received an emergency phone call. His expression immediately changed. "Boss." Kane looked up. "What happened?" The officer swallowed nervously before answering. "Something's wrong. Ian is in trouble." Kane's heart immediately sank. "Driver," he shouted. "Faster." The convoy accelerated down the highway as dozens of black SUVs followed close behind. Kane had spent 17 years searching for his brother. He refused to lose him now. Meanwhile, the bullying at school became even more vicious. Morton and his friends dragged Ian toward the rooftop, while dozens of students followed behind, believing they were watching a criminal receive punishment. Ian continued begging everyone to listen, insisting he had done nothing wrong, but nobody paid attention. The lies spread faster than the truth ever could. Standing on the rooftop, Ian looked around at the angry faces surrounding him. Every person believed he was guilty. His voice trembled. "I told all of you. I didn't touch her." Silence answered him. "Why won't anyone believe me?" No one stepped forward. No one defended him. No one questioned Alyssa's story. At that moment, memories of years of bullying, loneliness, humiliation, and rejection crashed into Ian all at once. He thought about every day he had spent suffering in silence. He remembered every insult, every beating, every moment someone had looked away instead of helping him. The weight of those painful memories became too much to carry. Tears filled his eyes as he slowly backed toward the edge of the rooftop. Far below, teachers noticed the growing crowd and realized something was terribly wrong. One of them immediately called emergency services. "This is Mont Horton High School. We have a student on the roof. He's about to jump. Please send help immediately." But it was already too late. Standing at the edge, Ian looked up at the darkening sky. In his heart, he believed there was no place left for him in this world. Through his tears, he whispered words that broke everyone's heart. "Dad, Mom, it hurts." He closed his eyes. "I don't want to embarrass the Carters anymore." His voice became almost impossible to hear. "If I die," he looked at the empty sky one final time. "Will it finally stop hurting?" Just as Ian leaned forward, a desperate voice echoed across the rooftop. "Ian." Everyone turned. Kane had finally arrived. He pushed through the crowd with panic written across his face. Looking directly at the young man standing on the edge, he shouted with every ounce of strength he had, "Don't." Ian slowly turned toward the unfamiliar man. Kane's eyes filled with tears. "I'm your brother." For a brief second, Ian froze. Confusion filled his face as he stared at the stranger who looked almost exactly like him. A faint, broken smile appeared on Ian's lips. "So," his voice trembled, "I really did have a brother." Tears rolled down his face. "Who loved me." He looked at Kane one last time. "Too bad." His feet slipped from the rooftop. "You're too late." Time seemed to stop as Ian's body disappeared over the edge of the rooftop. For a brief moment, every sound around Kane vanished. The crowd's screams, the rushing footsteps, and the sirens in the distance all faded into silence. His heart pounded as he sprinted toward the edge with everything he had. "Ian," he shouted again, desperately reaching forward, but he was only a fraction of a second too late. The only thing he could see was his younger brother falling toward the ground below. Kane's eyes filled with horror as years of searching threatened to end in the cruelest way imaginable. Students standing on the rooftop screamed in panic, while teachers rushed downstairs as fast as they could. The moment Kane reached the ground, he pushed through the terrified crowd and dropped to his knees beside Ian. Blood slowly spread beneath his brother's broken body, and his breathing was weak. Kane carefully lifted Ian's head into his arms, his hands trembling uncontrollably. "No. Ian, stay with me," he pleaded. "I just found you. You can't leave me now." Ian's eyes were barely open. Through the pain, he looked at Kane one last time, but was already too weak to speak. Within seconds, his consciousness faded completely. The sound of ambulance sirens finally filled the campus as paramedics rushed toward the scene. Everyone moved back. One of them shouted while another quickly examined Ian's injuries. They placed an oxygen mask over his face and carefully secured him onto a stretcher. Kane refused to let go until one of the doctors looked directly at him. "If you want him to survive, let us do our job." Kane stepped back only slightly, but climbed into the ambulance without hesitation. Throughout the entire ride to the hospital, he never took his eyes off his younger brother. 17 years of searching had led him to this moment, and he wasn't about to lose Ian after finding him. At the hospital, emergency doctors immediately rushed Ian into surgery while Kane waited outside the operating room. His bodyguards, who had followed him from the airport, stood nearby in complete silence. None of them had ever seen their fearless boss look so helpless. Hours passed like an eternity. Kane remained seated in the same chair without moving, staring at the operating room doors. He replayed every second of the rooftop scene in his mind, blaming himself again and again. If he had arrived only a few minutes earlier, if the traffic had been lighter, if the investigation had found Ian one day sooner, maybe none of this would have happened. Finally, the operating room doors opened. The lead neurosurgeon slowly removed his surgical mask before walking toward Kane. "Mr. Kane." Kane immediately stood. "How is my brother?" The doctor's expression revealed the answer before he even spoke. "We managed to save his life." Kane released a small breath of relief. But the doctor continued. "He suffered multiple fractures throughout his body, severe brain trauma, and extensive internal injuries." The room fell silent. "He has no conscious response." Kane stared at him. "What does that mean?" The doctor lowered his head. "Your brother is in a persistent vegetative state." The word struck Kane harder than any bullet ever could. "The chances of him waking up," the doctor hesitated, "are extremely low." For several seconds, Kane couldn't speak. Then he asked quietly, "How much?" The doctor looked confused. "What? Name your price." "I'm sorry. I don't care what it costs." Kane stepped closer. "Bring in the best specialists in the world. Fly them here. If they can't come, I'll take you into them." The doctor sighed sadly. "Mr. Kane, money alone cannot guarantee recovery." Kane looked directly into his eyes. "I didn't ask for guarantees." His voice became firm. "I asked you to save my brother." The doctor nodded respectfully. "We'll do everything we can." After the doctors left, Kane slowly entered Ian's hospital room. Machines filled the room with soft electronic beeps while tubes and monitors surrounded the hospital bed. Ian lay completely motionless beneath white blankets, looking nothing like the frightened young man Kane had seen only hours earlier. Kane quietly pulled up a chair and sat beside him. For a long time, he simply watched his brother breathe. Then he gently held Ian's hand. "I'm sorry." His voice barely rose above a whisper. "I failed you." Tears slowly rolled down Kane's face. "I promised Mom I would protect you." A painful childhood memory suddenly flashed through his mind. Years earlier, shortly before the tragedy that separated them, Kane had stood beside his mother while little Ian played happily nearby. His mother smiled warmly as she looked at both of her sons. "Kane," she gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "If one day I'm not here, you'll take care of your little brother, won't you?" Young Kane nodded without hesitation. "I promise." The memory faded. Back in the hospital room, Kane lowered his head. "I broke that promise." His fingers tightened around Ian's hand. "But I swear, no one will ever hurt you again." At that very moment, one of Kane's intelligence officers quietly entered the room carrying a confidential report. "Boss." Kane wiped away the tears from his face before standing. "What did you find?" The officer hesitated. "We investigated everything that happened before Ian jumped." And his expression grew serious. "It's worse than we expected." The officer placed several photographs, witness statements, and surveillance records on the table. After losing his memory as a child, Ian became quiet, gentle, and trusting. Kane listened silently. That made him the perfect target. The officer pointed toward 3 student photographs. "These boys, Morton, Richard, and Alex, they've been bullying Ian for years." The report included pictures of bruises, destroyed school supplies, torn clothes, and dozens of complaints that had mysteriously disappeared from school records. Witnesses described repeated beatings, public humiliation, and constant harassment. The officer then placed another photograph on the table. Alyssa. She falsely accused Ian of assault. We believe the entire incident was planned. Kane's eyes narrowed. Who are their parents? The officer opened another file. Morton's father is Theodore Whitlock, a member of the school board. Richard's father is Principal Morris Hale. Alex's father is Vice Principal August Mercer. The three families have used their influence to protect the boys for years. The room became completely silent. Kane slowly closed the file. So, he looked once more at Ian lying unconscious in the hospital bed. My little brother suffered all of this, while the adults responsible covered it up. His voice became calm. Too calm. Everyone who worked for Kane recognized that tone. It meant someone was about to pay. He looked back at the intelligence officer. Bring me Ian's clothes. The officer looked confused. And his school uniform. Realizing what Kane intended, the officer asked carefully, Boss, are you going yourself? Kane glanced at his unconscious brother. Then he answered with quiet determination. Ian and I look exactly alike. He picked up the school uniform lying on the chair beside the bed. Tomorrow. He stared toward the hospital window. I'm going back to Mount Horton High School. He buttoned the uniform jacket. As Ian. And every person who destroyed my brother's life. They're going to answer to me. The following morning, Mount Horton High School looked as ordinary as ever. Students laughed with their friends. Teachers walked through the hallways carrying stacks of papers, and nobody realized that everything was about to change. News about Ian's suicide attempt had already spread across the campus, and most students believed he was still lying unconscious in a hospital bed. Some even joked that he deserved what had happened. Others repeated the false rumor that Ian had tried to assault Alyssa. Not a single one of them knew the truth. While they continued their morning conversations, a black luxury car quietly stopped outside the school gates. The driver opened the rear door, and Kane stepped out wearing Ian's school uniform. With the same face, the same height, and almost the same appearance as his younger brother, nobody questioned his identity. Before walking through the school entrance, Kane looked at the building with cold determination. Ian, he whispered to himself, today, your nightmare ends. His security team remained inside nearby vehicles, ready to act if he called. One bodyguard stepped forward. Boss, are you sure you want to do this alone? Kane adjusted the school bag hanging from his shoulder and gave a calm smile. I'm here as a student, not as the head of an organization. If I need help, I'll call. Until then, stay out of sight. The bodyguards nodded without arguing. They understood their leader well. Kane wanted to experience exactly what Ian had endured. Only then could he understand the pain his younger brother had suffered every single day. As Kane entered the school courtyard, whispers immediately spread among the students. One boy stared at him in disbelief. Isn't that Ian? Another student frowned. I thought he jumped off the roof yesterday. A girl looked frightened. Didn't they say he was in the hospital? Soon the entire hallway filled with confused voices. Some students rubbed their eyes as if they had seen a ghost. Others laughed, convinced that the rumors about Ian's injuries had been exaggerated. Kane ignored every stare and calmly walked toward Ian's locker, carefully observing every face around him. He wanted to know exactly who had laughed while his brother suffered. Only a few minutes passed before Morton, Richard, and Alex appeared at the end of the hallway. The three bullies stopped walking the moment they saw Kane standing beside the locker. Morton stared in complete disbelief before breaking into a cruel smile. Well, look who's back, he mocked loudly. I guess the hospital didn't want you either. Richard laughed. I can't believe this idiot survived. Alex folded his arms. Looks like trash really is hard to get rid of. Several nearby students laughed along with them. Kane slowly turned around. His expression remained completely calm. Morton walked closer until they stood face to face. What? He smirked. Think you're tough now. Kane looked directly into his eyes. You hit me. Morton laughed. So? Kane continued quietly. Why are you angry? The unexpected question caught Morton off guard. What did you just say? Kane remained perfectly calm. If you hit someone, you shouldn't complain when they decide to fight back. The hallway instantly became silent. Students exchanged confused glances. This wasn't how Ian usually spoke. Richard stepped forward angrily. Looks like you forgot your place. Alex cracked his knuckles. We'll remind you. Morton pointed at Kane's chest. You're going to end up on your knees begging, just like always. Kane folded his arms. Really? Morton smiled proudly. You want to know what we're going to do? Without waiting for an answer, Richard began laughing. Just like old times. We'll stuff you inside a trash can. Alex continued. Then we'll shove your head into a toilet. Morton grinned. And after that, we'll make you crawl between our legs. Richard added another cruel idea. Then we'll strip you naked. Alex laughed loudly. We'll take pictures. Morton finished the sentence. And by lunchtime, the entire school will be laughing at you. Every cruel word echoed through the silent hallway. Kane listened without interrupting. Inside, however, his anger was growing with every sentence. He finally understood exactly what Ian had endured. His younger brother hadn't exaggerated anything. The reality had been even worse. Kane slowly looked at each bully one by one before speaking in a calm voice. So, this is what you've been doing to him. Morton rolled his eyes. What are you talking about? Kane took one small step forward. My brother lived through this every single day. The three bullies laughed again, believing Ian had simply become emotional after surviving his suicide attempt. Morton pushed Kane's shoulder. What? You going to cry again? The moment his hand touched Kane, everything changed. In one swift movement, Kane grabbed Morton's wrist before anyone could react. His grip was so strong that Morton's smile instantly disappeared. Before the bully understood what was happening, Kane twisted his arm just enough to force him backward without breaking any bones. Morton cried out in pain as his knees nearly touched the floor. The hallway fell completely silent. Richard and Alex stared in shock. They had bullied Ian for years. Never once had he fought back. Richard rushed forward, trying to pull Morton free. You little. Before he finished speaking, Kane stepped aside effortlessly, causing Richard to lose his balance and crash into a nearby row of lockers. The loud metallic sound echoed throughout the hallway. Alex immediately charged toward Kane, throwing a wild punch. Kane calmly caught his fist in midair and gently pushed him backward. Alex stumbled several steps before falling onto the floor in front of dozens of students. Nobody could believe what they were seeing. The same quiet student they had mocked for years had defeated all three bullies within seconds. Teachers hurried into the hallway after hearing the noise. Students quickly stepped aside as Principal Morris Hale arrived with Vice Principal August Mercer close behind. Both men immediately rushed toward their sons instead of asking what had happened. Principal Morris pointed angrily at Kane. Ian, what have you done? Before Kane could answer, Morton shouted dramatically. He attacked us, Richard quickly added. He just went crazy. Alex held his arm, pretending to be seriously injured. The principal glared at Kane without asking for his side of the story. I've defended you enough already. This time, you're expelled. The hallway became silent once again. Kane slowly looked at the principal, then at the vice principal, and finally at Theodore Whitlock, who had just arrived after being called by his son. At that moment, Kane realized the investigation had been right. The corruption inside Mont Horton High School went far beyond a few spoiled students. The adults were just as guilty. A faint smile appeared on Kane's face. The bullies thought they had won. The principal believed he could silence Ian once again. But none of them realized they had just declared war on the most powerful man they would ever meet. The game had only begun, and before it was over, every lie hidden inside Mont Horton High School would be exposed for the entire world to see. The hallway remained silent after the principal announced Ian's expulsion. Students watched nervously, expecting Kane to lower his head and quietly accept the punishment, just as Ian always had in the past. Instead, Kane stood perfectly still with a calm expression on his face. His confidence confused everyone around him. Principal Morris Hale folded his arms and spoke in a cold voice. You attacked 3 students without any reason. Your behavior is unacceptable. Pack your things and leave this school immediately. Before Kane could answer, Morton quickly stepped forward, pretending to be the victim. He pointed toward the bruise on his wrist and shouted loudly, "Look what he did to me. He should be arrested." Richard and Alex immediately supported the lie, claiming that Ian had suddenly attacked them for no reason. Several students looked uncertain because they had witnessed the confrontation, yet most remained silent, too afraid to challenge the sons of the school's most powerful families. Kane slowly looked around the hallway before turning back to the principal. Before you expel me, he said calmly, don't you think you should ask what actually happened? Principal Morris frowned. I don't need to hear your excuses. Kane smiled slightly. Interesting. His quiet confidence made the principal uncomfortable. So you're willing to punish a student without investigating the facts? The vice principal immediately stepped forward. Watch your tone, Ian. Kane looked directly at him. I learned that tone from watching all of you. The statement caused several students to exchange surprised glances. Ian had never spoken to a teacher like that before. Morton's father, Theodore Whitlock, arrived only moments later after receiving a phone call from his son. As a respected member of the school board, he walked through the crowd with complete confidence. Without asking a single question, he looked at Principal Morris and said, "Handle this quickly. My son doesn't deserve to waste his time dealing with someone like him." Kane quietly observed every word. The investigation had been correct. The adults never cared about finding the truth. Their only concern was protecting their own children. Just as the principal prepared to escort Kane toward the office, a frightened female student suddenly stepped forward from the crowd. Her hands were shaking, but she forced herself to speak. "Principal, Ian didn't start the fight." The hallway instantly became silent. Morton turned toward her with an angry expression. "What did you say?" The girl hesitated but gathered enough courage to continue. "I saw everything." Morton pushed Ian first. Another student slowly raised his hand. Richard also threatened him. A third student quietly added, "Alex tried to punch him." For the first time in years, students were beginning to speak the truth. Principal Morris immediately raised his voice. "Enough. None of you know what you're talking about." His desperate reaction only made the students more suspicious. Kane remained silent, allowing the adults to expose themselves. Theodore Whitlock glared at the students who had spoken. "Be careful with false accusations," he warned. The frightened students immediately lowered their heads again. Fear once again filled the hallway. At that moment, Kane reached into his pocket and calmly placed a small object on the principal's desk. It was a tiny digital voice recorder. The principal's face immediately changed. "When did you?" Kane answered before he could finish. "The entire conversation." He looked at Morton. "Every threat." Then at Richard. "Every confession." Finally at Alex. "And every word about what you've been doing to Ian for years." The hallway exploded with whispers. Morton's confident smile disappeared. Richard looked toward the principal in panic. Alex suddenly realized they had admitted everything in front of dozens of witnesses. Principal Morris immediately reached for the recorder. "Give me that." But Kane picked it up first. "No." His voice remained calm. "This belongs to the police now." For the first time, fear appeared on the adults' faces. They understood that if the recording became public, years of bullying and corruption could no longer be hidden. Theodore Whitlock stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Name your price." Several teachers looked shocked. Kane slowly smiled. "So, your solution is bribery." Whitlock realized his mistake immediately, but it was already too late. Several students had heard every word. Just then, two police officers entered the school after responding to reports about the earlier rooftop incident. Principal Morris quickly walked toward them. "Officers, this student attacked 3 innocent boys." Before the officers could respond, Kane calmly handed one of them the voice recorder. "I think you should listen to this first." The officers exchanged confused looks before pressing play. Within seconds, the hallway filled with Morton's own voice. "We'll stuff you inside a trash can. We'll shove your head into a toilet. We'll strip you and post your pictures all over the school." Every threat echoed through the silent hallway. Then came Kane's calm question. "So this is what you've been doing to him?" There was no denying it. The recording captured everything. The police officers slowly looked toward the 3 boys, then toward the principal. Their expressions became much more serious. One officer quietly asked, "Principal, would you like to explain why students have been openly confessing to years of abuse inside your school?" Principal Morris stood speechless. For the first time in many years, his authority could not protect him. As students watched in complete silence, Kane realized something important. This battle was no longer only about avenging Ian. It was about exposing an entire system that had protected cruelty for years. And this was only the beginning. Somewhere inside the hospital, Ian remained unconscious, completely unaware that his older brother had already started tearing apart the walls of corruption that had ruined his life. Before long, the truth hidden inside Mount Horton High School would reach far beyond the classrooms, dragging powerful families, respected officials, and every person who had helped cover up the bullying into the light. The people who had laughed at Ian's suffering were finally beginning to understand that actions always carry consequences, and this time, no amount of wealth or influence would be enough to save them. The atmosphere inside Mont Horton High School changed the moment the police officers finished listening to the recording. Only minutes earlier, Principal Morris Hale had been completely confident that he could force Ian out of school without anyone questioning his decision. Now the evidence was impossible to ignore. Every threat Morton, Richard, and Alex had made was clearly recorded, along with their own admissions of years of bullying. Students who had been too afraid to speak suddenly realized that the truth was finally stronger than the lies. Whispering spread through the hallway as everyone watched the three bullies lose the confidence they had always carried. One of the officers looked directly at Morton. "Is this your voice on the recording?" Morton immediately glanced toward his father before answering. "They're twisting my words." Theodore Whitlock quickly stepped forward and interrupted. "Officer, these are just children arguing. There's no reason to make this into a criminal investigation." The officer remained calm. Threatening another student, physically assaulting him over a long period of time, and publicly humiliating him are not harmless arguments. Theodore's confident smile slowly disappeared. For the first time, someone refused to treat his family differently because of their influence. Principal Morris attempted to regain control of the situation. "Officers, perhaps we should discuss this privately." Kane quietly folded his arms. "Why privately?" Every eye turned toward him. "The bullying happened publicly. The accusations against Ian were made publicly. My expulsion was announced publicly. So why should the truth be hidden behind closed doors?" Several students nodded in agreement. Even some teachers lowered their heads, ashamed that they had ignored Ian's suffering for so long. The officers began questioning students one by one. At first, nobody wanted to speak. Fear had controlled the school for years, and everyone knew the power held by the Whitlock, Hale, and Mercer families. Then the same girl who had defended Ian earlier gathered enough courage to step forward again. She described how Morton and his friends had repeatedly targeted Ian since his first year at the school. Another student admitted seeing Ian forced to eat lunch alone after his food had been thrown away. A third student confessed that the three boys often locked Ian inside storage rooms for hours just to entertain themselves. As more students found the courage to speak, the hallway filled with painful stories that had remained hidden for years. The officers carefully recorded every statement. What began as a simple school incident quickly became a major investigation. Parents who had arrived to pick up their children overheard the testimonies and immediately began questioning the school administration. Reporters waiting outside after Ian's rooftop incident noticed the growing police presence and rushed toward the entrance with cameras. Within minutes, news vans surrounded Mont Horton High School. Students recorded everything on their phones, and videos of the confrontation spread across social media faster than anyone expected. Inside the principal's office, Kane quietly sat across from the investigators while they reviewed the evidence. One officer looked up from the files. "Ian, according to these witness statements, you've been reporting bullying for years." Kane nodded slightly. "Yes. Why wasn't anything done?" Kane looked toward Principal Morris, who sat silently beside his lawyer. "Maybe you should ask him." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. The investigators then turned their attention to Alyssa. She was brought into the office and asked to repeat her accusation against Ian. At first, she confidently claimed that Ian had tried to assault her in an empty classroom. However, when the officers compared her statement with security camera timestamps, her story immediately began falling apart. One investigator placed printed screenshots on the table. "These cameras show you entering the hallway only seconds before Morton and the others arrived. That isn't enough time for the incident you described to have happened." Alyssa's face turned pale. She tried to explain herself, but every new answer contradicted the previous one. Morton suddenly stood up. "This is ridiculous. You're all believing that loser over us." Kane calmly looked at him. "The difference is..." He paused for a moment. "I don't need anyone to believe me." He pointed toward the evidence lying across the table. "The facts speak for themselves." Just then, one of Kane's intelligence officers quietly entered the building pretending to be a legal representative. He politely handed Kane a sealed envelope before leaving without attracting attention. Kane opened it and read the contents carefully. His expression remained calm, but a faint smile appeared on his face. The investigation his organization had started the previous night had already uncovered something much bigger than school bullying. The envelope contained financial records linking Theodore Whitlock, Principal Morris Hale, and Vice Principal August Mercer to several illegal payments made through school funds. Expensive contracts had been awarded to companies owned by their relatives. Scholarship money meant for disadvantaged students had mysteriously disappeared over several years. The corruption extended far beyond protecting 3 spoiled teenagers. Kane quietly closed the envelope. So, he looked at the 3 adults sitting together. This isn't only about bullying. None of them answered. Their silence revealed everything. Outside the school, television reporters had already begun broadcasting live. Headlines flashed across news channels. Bullying scandal rocks Mont Horton High School. Police investigate claims of administrative corruption. School board member's son accused of years of abuse. Parents arriving at the campus demanded answers. Some openly criticized the administration, while others comforted students who had finally found the courage to tell the truth. The school that had spent years protecting powerful families was now facing public scrutiny unlike anything in its history. As the afternoon came to an end, the police informed Theodore Whitlock, Principal Morris Hale, and Vice Principal August Mercer that they were all required to remain available for questioning while the investigation continued. None of them were arrested yet, but their confidence had completely disappeared. They realized that this case was no longer under their control. Before leaving the school, Kane walked back through the hallway where Ian had suffered countless humiliations. He stopped beside the locker where his brother had been forced to wipe away his own blood only a day earlier. Gently placing one hand on the cold metal door, Kane whispered, "I'm keeping my promise, Ian. Every person who made you suffer will answer for what they've done." As he walked toward the exit, dozens of students silently stepped aside to make room for him. This time, nobody laughed. Nobody whispered insults. Instead, many looked at him with respect, while others lowered their heads in shame for never helping Ian when he needed them most. Across town, however, another meeting was already taking place. Inside the luxurious Whitlock mansion, Theodore, Principal Morris, Vice Principal Mercer, Morton, Richard, Alex, and Alyssa gathered around a large table. Their reputations were collapsing, and panic filled the room. Theodore finally broke the silence. "If that boy stays alive, our families are finished." The room became completely quiet. Then Morton looked up with cold eyes and spoke the words that would change everything. "Then maybe we shouldn't let him wake up." As darkness settled over Montana, the luxurious Whitlock mansion was filled with fear instead of confidence. For years, Theodore Whitlock, Principal Morris Hale, and Vice Principal August Mercer had controlled Mont Horton High School without anyone daring to question their authority. Whenever their sons bullied another student, complaints quietly disappeared, witnesses were pressured into silence, and parents who demanded justice eventually gave up. They believed they were untouchable. But after Kane's arrival, everything had changed in less than 24 hours. Police had begun investigating, reporters surrounded the school, and social media was flooded with videos exposing years of abuse. Their carefully protected reputations were collapsing before their eyes. Inside the mansion's conference room, Theodore slammed his fist onto the table. "How did this happen?" he shouted angrily. Ian never fought back before. Morton remained unusually quiet. For the first time in his life, he looked genuinely frightened. "Dad, that wasn't Ian." Theodore stared at him. "What are you talking about?" Morton swallowed nervously. "He looks exactly like Ian, but he fights differently. He talks differently. He wasn't scared of us." Richard nodded in agreement. "He took all 3 of us down without even trying." Alex lowered his head. "I've never seen anyone move that fast." The room became silent. Something about Ian's sudden transformation simply didn't make sense. Theodore looked toward Alyssa. "Are you absolutely sure he didn't remember anything?" Alyssa nodded. "I'm sure. He acted exactly like Ian when I trapped him in the hallway yesterday." She paused for a moment before adding, "But today, it felt like a completely different person. No one could explain it." The man standing in the school looked identical to Ian, yet his confidence, intelligence, and strength were nothing like the quiet student they had tormented for years. Principal Morris suddenly spoke. "It doesn't matter who he is." Everyone looked at him. "The real problem is the boy in the hospital." Theodore slowly nodded. "If Ian wakes up, he'll tell the police everything." Vice Principal Mercer sighed heavily. And if that happens, every complaint we buried over the years will be reopened. The room fell into another uncomfortable silence. Each of them understood exactly what was at stake. Their careers, their businesses, their reputations, and possibly even their freedom depended on keeping Ian silent forever. Morton finally broke the silence with a cold expression. Then we make sure he never wakes up. Even Alyssa looked shocked. You can't be serious. Morton turned toward her. Do you want to go to prison? Nobody answered. Theodore slowly leaned back in his chair, thinking carefully. After several long seconds, he looked toward Richard and Alex. No one can know we're involved. Richard nodded. We'll find someone who needs money. Theodore looked at his son. If this goes wrong, all of us lose everything. Morton answered without hesitation. It won't. Meanwhile, Kane remained at the hospital beside Ian's bed. Although the doctors had stabilized Ian's condition, there was still no sign that he would regain consciousness. Kane quietly sat beside him, reading through the investigation reports his intelligence team had prepared. Every page revealed another cruel detail about Ian's life. There were photographs of bruises hidden beneath school uniforms, medical reports describing unexplained injuries, and complaints that had mysteriously disappeared from school records. Kane slowly closed the final folder before looking toward his unconscious brother. I'm sorry, he whispered. You went through all of this alone. I should have found you sooner. The silence inside the room was interrupted by a gentle knock on the door. The lead neurosurgeon entered with several new test results. Kane immediately stood. Any changes? The doctor sighed. Physically, he's stable. But neurologically, he hesitated. There hasn't been any improvement. Kane looked toward Ian. So we wait. The doctor nodded. Yes. Sometimes recovery takes weeks. Sometimes months. And sometimes. He couldn't finish the sentence. Kane understood. After the doctor left, one of Kane's trusted bodyguards quietly entered the room. Boss. What is it? Our surveillance teams intercepted suspicious phone calls. Kane immediately became alert. From who? Theodore Whitlock's residence. The bodyguard handed him a tablet containing recorded conversations. We couldn't hear everything, but one sentence was clear. Kane pressed the audio recording. Morton's voice echoed through the speaker. If Ian wakes up, we're finished. Another voice answered. Then don't let him wake up. The room instantly became silent. Kane's eyes turned cold. They're planning something. The bodyguard nodded. We've already increased security around the hospital. Kane looked around Ian's room. Double it. I don't want anyone entering this floor without my permission. Yes, boss. Within the next hour, additional security personnel quietly surrounded the hospital. Some disguised themselves as visitors. Others posed as maintenance workers and hospital staff. Hidden cameras were installed in every hallway leading to Ian's room, while plainclothes guards monitored every elevator and emergency exit. Patients and doctors noticed nothing unusual, but the entire floor had quietly become one of the safest places in the city. Late that night, the hospital grew unusually quiet. Nurses completed their rounds while most visitors had already gone home. Outside, rain began falling softly against the windows. Everything appeared peaceful. Then a man wearing a doctor's coat stepped out of the elevator. He carried a medical file and walked confidently toward Ian's room. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual, but one of Kane's undercover guards immediately noticed something strange. The hospital identification badge looked authentic. Yet the man's shoes were completely dry despite the heavy rain outside. The guard discreetly touched the communication device hidden beneath his sleeve. Target approaching. Another guard quietly responded. We have visual. The fake doctor reached Ian's hospital door and slowly placed his hand on the handle. Before he could enter, Kane's voice came from behind him. Looking for someone? The man froze. He turned slowly and found Kane standing at the end of the hallway, his expression calm, but his eyes filled with warning. For a brief second, neither of them spoke. Then the fake doctor suddenly reached inside his coat. At the same moment, Kane's bodyguards rushed forward from every direction. The assassination attempt had begun, and whoever had sent the killer was about to discover that protecting Ian was no longer the job of a helpless older brother. It was the mission of the most feared Mafia Godfather in the country. The people who wanted Ian dead had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. The fake doctor had barely touched the handle of Ian's hospital room when Kane's voice echoed through the silent hallway. Every movement stopped instantly. The man slowly turned around, pretending to remain calm, but the brief look of panic in his eyes was impossible to hide. Kane stood only a few meters away with his hands in his pockets, watching every tiny movement. The hallway looked empty, yet the assassin had no idea that nearly a dozen of Kane's men were already hidden nearby, dressed as doctors, nurses, patients, and security guards. The man forced a nervous smile. "I'm here to examine the patient." Kane calmly walked closer. "Really?" His voice remained steady. "Then tell me his name." The fake doctor hesitated for only a second, but that single moment was enough. Kane smiled faintly. A real doctor would never hesitate. Realizing his disguise had failed, the man suddenly reached inside his white coat. Before he could pull out the syringe hidden inside, Kane's bodyguards rushed from both ends of the hallway. The assassin tried to escape, throwing one guard aside before sprinting toward the emergency stairs. Nurses screamed as patients quickly moved out of the way. The quiet hospital instantly became a scene of chaos. The assassin raced down the staircase, believing he could disappear before anyone caught him. However, Kane's men had already blocked every exit. As soon as the man reached the ground floor, two guards stepped in front of him while another team closed the door behind him. Trapped with nowhere left to run, the assassin pulled out a knife and attacked without hesitation. He slashed wildly, hoping to create enough space to escape, but Kane's security team had years of combat experience. Within seconds, they disarmed him and forced him to the ground. Even then, the man continued struggling, refusing to surrender. We've also found evidence that scholarship money meant for struggling students disappeared over the last 5 years. Kane remained silent. Every new document revealed another layer of corruption hidden beneath the school's respectable image. Meanwhile, police officers executed search warrants at several locations connected to the investigation. Detectives entered the school administration building, collecting computers, financial files, and surveillance records before they could disappear. At Theodore Whitlock's office, investigators seized documents, mobile phones, and confidential business records. Similar searches took place at the homes of Principal Morris and Vice Principal Mercer. Television cameras captured every moment as boxes of evidence were carried outside. The people who had once controlled the town through fear now found themselves surrounded by police officers and journalists asking difficult questions. Inside the Whitlock mansion, panic spread through the entire household. Theodore angrily paced across the living room while his lawyers desperately made phone calls. "How did they get search warrants so quickly?" he demanded. One attorney answered carefully. "The financial evidence is stronger than we expected. Someone has been collecting information for a long time." Theodore immediately realized the truth. Kane had not simply reacted emotionally after finding Ian. He had quietly built an entire case against everyone responsible. Every attempt to cover up the truth had only created more evidence against them. Morton, Richard, and Alex sat silently in another room, no longer looking like the confident bullies who had ruled the school. Richard finally spoke. "Maybe we should tell the police everything." Morton instantly stood up. "Have you lost your mind?" Richard looked frightened. "If we keep lying, we're going to prison anyway." Alex lowered his head. "We never thought Ian would survive." The room became silent. For the first time, all three realized that years of cruelty had finally caught up with them. Elsewhere, Alyssa struggled with her own guilt. She sat alone inside her bedroom, replaying everything that had happened in her mind. She remembered Ian repeatedly saying, "I didn't touch her." She remembered his desperate face on the rooftop. She remembered Kane arriving only seconds too late. Tears slowly filled her eyes as she realized that her false accusation had pushed an innocent person toward death. After hours of thinking, she made a decision. Picking up her phone, she called the lead investigator handling the case. "I need to tell you the truth," she whispered. "Everything I said about Ian, it was a lie." That single confession changed the entire investigation. Later that afternoon, Alyssa voluntarily appeared at the police station with her lawyer. During several hours of questioning, she admitted that Morton had pressured her into helping frame Ian. She explained how the plan had been prepared in advance, how the accusation had been rehearsed, and how the three boys expected the school administration to protect them as it always had before. Every word she spoke matched the evidence investigators had already collected. Her statement officially destroyed the false assault case that had ruined Ian's reputation. When Kane received the news, he quietly closed his eyes for a moment. One of his men asked, "Boss, are you satisfied?" Kane slowly shook his head. "Not yet." He looked through the hospital window toward Ian's room. Clearing his name is only the beginning. He knew that restoring Ian's reputation would never erase the years of loneliness, fear, and suffering his younger brother had endured. That evening, police announced criminal charges against Theodore Whitlock, Principal Morris Hale, and Vice Principal August Mercer for multiple corruption-related offenses, while additional charges connected to the bullying case remained under investigation. Morton, Richard, and Alex were also taken into custody for questioning after new witnesses came forward. As police vehicles left the Whitlock mansion, reporters shouted questions from every direction. Cameras captured the once powerful families covering their faces as they were escorted outside. The people who had believed themselves untouchable now stood before the entire nation in disgrace. Back at the private medical facility, Kane quietly entered Ian's room carrying the latest newspaper. The front page headline read, "Ian cleared of false assault allegation." Kane gently placed the newspaper beside the hospital bed before sitting down. "You hear that, little brother?" he said softly. "The world finally knows the truth." For a brief moment, nothing happened. Then, the heart monitor remained steady. Ian's fingers moved again. This time, the movement was stronger than before. Kane immediately stood. "Nurse." Doctors rushed into the room as brain activity monitors began showing a noticeable increase. The lead neurosurgeon quickly examined Ian before looking at Kane with cautious excitement. "Mr. Kane." He smiled for the first time since the accident. "I think your brother is trying to wake up." The room fell silent. After everything they had endured, the greatest battle was finally nearing its end. But before Ian could open his eyes, one final confrontation still awaited Kane. The moment when every person responsible for his brother's suffering would stand before justice and answer for every lie, every act of cruelty, and every crime they had committed. The moment the doctors rushed into Ian's hospital room, the atmosphere changed completely. Nurses quickly checked the medical monitors while specialists carefully examined every sign of movement. Kane stood only a few steps away, his heart racing faster than it had during any battle of his life. For 17 years he had searched for his younger brother, and after finally finding him, he had almost lost him forever. Now, for the first time since the accident, there was real hope. The lead neurosurgeon watched the brain activity monitor for several long moments before looking toward Kane with a cautious smile. "Mr. Kane," he said quietly, "his neurological activity is increasing. This is a very encouraging sign." Kane slowly walked to Ian's bedside and gently held his brother's hand once again. "Ian," he whispered, "you've fought long enough. Come back. You don't have to face this alone anymore." Several minutes passed in complete silence. Then Ian's fingers moved again, stronger than before. His eyelids trembled slightly as the machines continued recording increased brain activity. The doctors remained calm, carefully checking every response without rushing the process. Finally, Ian slowly opened his eyes. The bright hospital lights forced him to blink several times before his vision became clear. The first person he saw was Kane sitting beside him with tears in his eyes. Ian looked confused for a moment, struggling to remember where he was. His lips moved weakly before a soft voice finally escaped. "Brother?" Kane could no longer hold back his emotions. He smiled through his tears and gently squeezed Ian's hand. "Yes," he answered. "I'm here. I finally found you." The room fell completely silent as doctors quietly stepped outside, allowing the two brothers a few private moments together. Ian looked at Kane's face carefully, still trying to understand everything that had happened. Fragments of childhood memories slowly returned to him. The small house where they had lived together, their mother's gentle smile, and the promise Kane had made years ago to always protect him. Tears rolled down Ian's cheeks as those forgotten memories resurfaced. "I remember," he whispered. Kane nodded with relief. "You don't have to remember everything today. The important thing is that you're alive." Over the next several days, Ian's condition improved steadily. Although his body remained weak from the injuries, his mind became clearer each day. Doctors described his recovery as remarkable, calling it far better than anyone had expected after such severe trauma. During his rehabilitation, investigators visited the hospital to record Ian's official statement. This time, Ian calmly described every year of bullying he had suffered inside Mount Horton High School. He spoke about the beatings, the humiliation, the false accusations, and the constant fear that had slowly destroyed his hope. Cain remained beside him throughout the interview, silently supporting his younger brother while allowing him to tell his own story. Ian's testimony, combined with Alyssa's confession, financial evidence, witness statements, and the recorded threats, completely destroyed the defense built by Theodore Whitlock, Principal Morris Hale, Vice Principal August Mercer, Morton, Richard, and Alex. Prosecutors filed multiple criminal charges against the adults for corruption, abuse of authority, destruction of evidence, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. The three bullies faced charges related to repeated assaults, harassment, intimidation, and their role in driving Ian to attempt suicide. The attempted murder investigation also continued, supported by financial records connecting the assassin's payment to companies controlled by the three powerful families. One by one, the people who had believed they were above the law were forced to answer before the courts. News of the case spread across the country. Television programs discussed the importance of protecting victims of bullying, while newspapers praised the students who had finally found the courage to tell the truth. Mount Horton High School underwent major changes after the scandal. The corrupt administration was removed, independent investigators reviewed years of complaints, and new policies were introduced to protect students from abuse. Counselors were hired, anonymous reporting systems were created, and teachers received training to recognize and stop bullying before it could grow into something much worse. The school that had once ignored suffering slowly began rebuilding itself on honesty and accountability. Several weeks later, Ian was finally discharged from the hospital. As he stepped outside, he paused for a moment to breathe the fresh air. Cain stood beside him, smiling quietly. A black luxury car waited nearby, but for the first time in many years, neither brother was thinking about wealth, power, or revenge. They were simply grateful to have found each other again. Ian looked toward Cain and asked softly, "What happens now?" Cain placed a hand on his brother's shoulder. "Now," he replied, "we go home." Before leaving Montana, the two brothers visited a peaceful hillside overlooking the town. They stood together in silence, remembering the difficult journey that had brought them back together. Cain looked toward the sky and quietly spoke as though his mother could hear him. "Mom, I kept my promise. It took me 17 years, but I finally brought him home." Ian smiled gently, knowing that despite everything they had lost, they still had each other. As the car disappeared down the highway, both brothers left behind a town forever changed by the truth. The people who had abused their power had fallen. The innocent had finally been heard. Justice had replaced fear, and hope had replaced despair. Cain had begun his journey seeking revenge, but in the end, he discovered something far more valuable, the chance to rebuild the family he thought he had lost forever. And that brings us to the end of this incredible story, My Brother, the Mafia Godfather. If you enjoyed this emotional journey of family, courage, justice, and revenge, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next full drama explanation. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.